Afternoon, everyone. So we've got a panel here that are going to be discussing some legal and commercial issues. Bit of a mixture of subjects. We've got some TOTSCO-related conversation. We've got some people from the Ombudsman talking about dispute resolution. And we've also got someone from Trenches Law. So I'll just go down the line if I start at the far end. We've got Liz Morriso, who's the regional manager correct me if I'm wrong, by the way, for Telecommunications Ombudsman, and next to her is Aggie Pasovic, who's Relationship Manager. Is that right? Okay. And then we've got Gita Sorensen, who's Director of GOS Consulting, and who is consulting into TOTSCO to advise them on how best to do what they're trying to achieve. One of the good guys, I might just add before we get the knives out. Marcel, we've heard from this morning, he's Director of the CSP as part of the Common Wholesale Platform, and is offering a service of what you might class as middleware between the customer and TOTSCO for those people who don't want to implement or can't implement an API. So I'm sure we'll touch on that a bit later. And sat next to me is George Redak from Trenches Law, and you're a bit of an expert on way leave and co-powers.
Yes.
Okay. So I think we'll start with the Ombudsman. So if you are a member of UKWISPA, you automatically get enrolled into the Telecommunications Ombudsman as a member, whether you knew that or not. So everyone here who is a member, you are members also of Ombudsman, and it's actually a mandatory requirement. I thought I'd start off first. Does anyone have any experience, or have they ever been through the ADR dispute process with a customer? Show of green. David? No? Maybe two. So not a common process. I don't think anyone wants to go through it, but no one wants to admit it. But when it does happen, it's nice to have that middle person to take all the stress away from it and have a bit of a middle ground. So I might just ask both of you, what are the sort of key advantages to being on board with the Telecoms Ombudsman, and maybe a bit more widely, why is it important to protect the consumer?
Yeah, sure. I mean, can you hear me? I think you can. It's really important to protect the consumer. You know, they're not too savvy with... they're not too savvy really when it comes to knowing their own rights. Ofcom's got a real focus on consumer protection as well as fairness too. They've got the fairness guide, but we are impartial, so it is important to remember that. So we'd look at terms and conditions, we look at general conditions. I think someone alluded earlier to they're quite complex in nature, but we'll look at that, any other legislation. But we do actually take a holistic approach to complaints, so no two complaints are ever the same. They might be similar, but we deal with that consumer in that complaint at that time, and that's what we do when we're completing our investigation. But it's not just about individual cases. We have a large proportion of the communication sector as our members. So that puts us in a really unique position. So we can see what they're doing, and we can help smaller companies make some amendments and to make that work for them. We also have multi-sector, so we also the Energy Ombudsman, and we also deal with those pesky parking tickets at Poplar, so parking on private land appeals. So we do have the roundness and be able to take things between ourselves, and that can help. We have round table events. So we're thinking about consumers who perhaps have some additional needs. We bring the sector together, and not just our members, but members of CSAS, who are the other ADR provider, to work out what's the best way to do it is for that consumer. One of our main roles, I suppose, is to repair damage. Complaints, you know, sometimes they can feel a little bit personal. We know that the trust has gone if the customer's been hanging on for ages about, you know, they've been waiting for service that you promised to give them. Then we can help explain things a little better. Perhaps things have got lost in translation, and they come to us for that independent review. But if we see something that doesn't quite fit, we'll also feed that back to you. So if we see something as a result of our investigation, perhaps in your terms and conditions, and think, oh, we're not too sure about that, we'll provide some guidance. We don't just go to Ofcom straight away. We do obviously meet with Ofcom quite regularly, but we do try and to help you out as a business and just to try and get better. I mean, it always sounds really funny when we say that we just want people to provide a good service. You know, we do exist for a reason, but our aim is to give that good service. Sorry, I did waffle on a bit there.
No, that's great. And if anyone's got any questions from the room, please dive in. It's a bit of a two-way conversation here. Something I thought of is, what's the cost of processing a complaint? So obviously membership's included, but does it ever get to the point where an operator will need to pay extra if it gets to a certain level?
Yeah, so we do actually charge per case, but the good news is, through the UKWISPA membership, you get a reduction in the case fee. If I remember correctly, it's about £300 plus VAT. And outside of being a member of UKWISPA, it's considerably higher. And again, you know, we are not for profit, so it's just to cover the cost of reviewing the complaint.
And once a customer brings that complaint to you, obviously the operator's faced with a £300 charge for that. If, let's say, for example, it's a dispute over the end of a contract and the contract isn't worth £300, is it okay for the operator just to fall over and say, okay, fair enough, you win, we'll let you go, and then the complaint disappears? Or do you still have to take that through to the end and sort of continue to charge us some Beratus, I suppose?
Well, we have our costs that get passed on to companies, so we're free to consumers. We have a couple of stages in the process so that we can offer a facilitated complaint resolution. So you'll get notification of the complaint and you think, oh, actually, this could be resolved pretty swiftly with less money than the case fee. Then, you know, you can use that facility, but that's for you to go through your own complaints procedure, and having a published complaints procedure is part of the regulations, so you do need to do that. And if you just stick to following that and doing what you say you're going to do when you're going to do it, then, you know, hopefully you won't get, you know, I hope that we don't have to deal with you dealing with your complaints, but, you know, that's why we're here.
Would you say, what's the most common style of complaint? Is it sort of disputing contracts, or what do you tend to find? I'm just wondering what we can do to prevent it getting to that stage. What are the most common complaints?
Yeah, no problem. So in terms of UKWISPA members, the complaint volumes are extremely low, which is really great. And the main complaint reasons are service quality, mis-selling, customer service, and contract issues and billing. In terms of industry as a wider piece, it's mainly service quality. So again, you know, it's very, very similar there. Billing, customer service, contract issues, equipment, and mis-selling.
Okay, great, thank you. Any questions from the room on the subject of dispute resolution?
It's going to go regulation.
It's going so well.
Hi. On dispute resolution, so you're talking about customer making a complaint, going through case and everything else. What happens to that fee if the complaint isn't upheld and they were wrong? Do we still pay it anyway?
Yeah. Yeah, because the customer's entitled to the, oh, don't shake your head, but the customer's entitled to an independent review, and so we're free to the consumer, then we have to pass that charge on. But hopefully you won't get any complaints. But yeah, we do need to maintain that charge. We do have, you know, terms of reference in complaints that we can accept. So, for example, we probably wouldn't accept a complaint about network build because it's not an electronic communication service. So there's things like that in our case acceptance that we look at. But yeah, the short answer is you still pay.
There's no such thing as a free lunch, come on.
It's a very good service, though. You get me an Aggie.
Anyone else before I go all the way that way? Good stuff. What? I am. Steps abound.
Hi, it's Neil from Converged. I heard someone once say that if they trigger a legal action against the customer, then that invalidates the ADR process that's underway. And sometimes people do that to, I think, avoid the fee that they would pay out whether they win or lose. So I don't know if it's true or not, but just an observation of something that I once heard on that topic.
Yeah, we won't. If it's undergoing legal proceedings, we can't get involved.
Hi, can we as WISPs engage you to talk to Ofcom about Totsco?
We do talk to Ofcom quite a lot. We meet monthly and quarterly with a few different ones, but we'll be here tomorrow, but no.
I think Gator put her hand up and said, yes, you can engage me. Is that it? We really needed 3 microphones, didn't we?
So thank you very much for that. I think that covers everything on dispute resolution. Might move over to George next, just to talk about a little bit about way leave and code powers. Something we've actually considered in the past, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it's ballpark sort of 10 grand.
That's Ofcom's fee.
Ofcom's fee, and then a fee for yourself, a similar kind of...
Well, it's not 10 grand.
Okay. So it's...
We're far too cheap.
We've considered it, and it's obviously a big investment. The advantages, as I understand, that you get from that is the fact that you can put a cabinet anywhere, you can put a pole up anywhere. Maybe I'm being a bit generalised here, but so there's obvious advantages. But we've always tried to be a little bit more like the friendly and approachable image to landowners. So maybe if you could just talk a little bit about the pros and cons of actually obtaining code powers and whether that actually puts an operator at a disadvantage because they come across as being this big, corporate monster that can do anything they want.
Yeah, sure. So can everyone hear me? Oh, my voice does not sound great through a microphone. So in terms of being able to put cabinet or pole anywhere, it's not quite as simple as that, but it is, broadly speaking, much easier to do that because one of the main benefits of being a code operator is being able to benefit from permitted development. So you don't need to get planning permission. Usually for cabs, poles up to 15 metres. I think they've just put it up to 25 metres actually. So it is much easier. Obviously, usual caveats, listed buildings, conservation areas, things like that are accepted, but even that's easier. The other main benefit is that it's generally easier to work with, well, I say easier, you've got more strength in working with landowners, because you're absolutely right in that without having code powers, one of the big benefits is that landowners tend to favour those providers because it's better for them, because essentially if you've got code powers, once you're on a property, on land, once your equipment's installed, it's almost impossible for that landowner to remove you. They're also much more limited in terms of what they can charge, so for a consideration fee, annual rental, things like that, there are limitations. Without having code powers, you often find that landowners, I mean, some of you probably suffer from it. I know we've done some quite a few quite a few code power applications in this space for quite a few of you guys, and one of the main reasons behind that has been because of the extortionate rents that landowners are charging, and they still do try and charge it, but as a code operator you can very much back against that. And one big advantage, which does make you look very unfriendly, being honest, but is sometimes really necessary, is the fact that way leave agreements can be imposed. So if you've got a landlord who is outright refusing, definitely not coming on my land, we don't want a code operator, we're not happy, you can serve a statutory notice, and generally providing that there's 2 tests to kind of meet, one being public benefit, one can the landowner be compensated by money. As long as you can meet those tests, which is usually the case, the tribunal would impose an agreement. So landowners are often, once you kind of threaten that, it does bring them to the table, and it can obviously have a reputational effect, but we often find that it works. We do a lot of that as well. So.
Interesting, actually, come to Bill in a second, Ian, if you want to be ready. Show of green if anyone's actually got code powers as an operator at the moment. So not that many, but let's say 10. So that's interesting. Just before we get to Bill, I might just ask if someone is already an operator and they have lots of agreements in place, whether that's spit and handshake or something in writing, how do you retrospectively then approach those people and say, okay, now we have code powers, do you need to re-sign them? What's the best way of doing that? And the best way of avoiding upset?
So actually, that's a really good question. It's quite difficult to do sometimes, and it really depends on what's in the agreement. So wherever we're preparing waiver agreements for an operator that doesn't have code powers, we always include wording to the effect that if ever you are successful in obtaining code powers, this agreement will apply as a code agreement. So if you don't have code powers now, I would definitely recommend putting that clause in any of your leases, where leaves, etc., so that it will apply. If not, and if it's an agreement that was entered into pre-code powers, then upon renewal of that agreement, that's when you would go for a code agreement. If they refuse to do that, that's when, again, you fall back on your code powers. But it really depends on what's in the initial agreement, and it's generally at the point of renewal that it would renew into a code agreement.
Hello. Just thought mention my over Christmas, one of our landowners changed on one of our main transmission sites, and we spent probably 6 weeks of my time and £2,500 legal fees to renegotiate a £1,000 a year leasing agreement on a piece of land. At the end of that, my lawyer turned around and said, it would have been a lot cheaper if you got code powers. I said, how much cheaper? He said, £50. So, you know, we've got 110 transmission sites. So next on my list is getting code powers, obviously. So, yeah.
And I suppose the takeaway from what you just said, George, was that the landowner, once you've got the code powers, the landowner hasn't really got a choice, because you can sort of execute that right to say, we are staying here. So I suppose it could get a bit dirty sometimes, but at least you've got legally, you could have sort of commercially safe, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. So it's not that they don't have any choice. Really, there's a couple of kind of small caveats, but really, unless they're intending on doing a huge redevelopment of the land, it's very, very difficult for them to refuse. And there's other benefits as well. One of the things that I probably should mention as well is, as a code power operator, we've got the right to serve statutory notices to impose a code agreement on someone to go and install equipment, as we've just said. There's also a right actually to have a temporary agreement imposed over existing infrastructure. So if there's existing infrastructure there that doesn't yet have a way leave agreement, it's archaic, as you said, maybe a bit of a spit and a handshake, there is a power there as well to have a temporary agreement imposed over that equipment whilst an agreement is reached. So that can be quite useful as well.
Any other questions in the room? Ian and someone on the right there as well.
Hi, I just wanted to add that I'm seeing a bit of a trend at the moment whereby the freeholders are so nervous of code operators, they're putting termination rights in contracts. So they'll say, if you become a code operator, then we've got the right to terminate this agreement, because that you will have so many powers against the freeholder, as George says.
I'm going for the question.
Hi, George. So you guys helped us get the code powers, which is great. We can do fantastic things and put cabinets and masts and telegraph poles up. But one of the stumbling blocks that we seem to come across is if we want entry to put fibre into an MDU, for example, the landlord will come back and say, yes, you can have entry, but it's £5,000 to £10,000 for our surveyors to agree the cable route, which seems to be a massive stumbling block. I read something that Ofcom were looking to change that. Has there been any progress or any way around that?
Yeah, so this is something that we're quite passionate about as well, James. There was a recent consultation on the code. Was it last year now? It goes so quick, but there was a recent consultation on the code which has brought in the the PSTI has brought in the changes to the code. And one of the questions that we actually posed as part of that consultation was, is there going to be any restriction, guidelines, legislation around professional fees? Because that's one of the big stumbling blocks that we come across as well. Some of the solicitors that we're dealing with, they want to charge £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 for a 5-page way leave agreement. It's ridiculous, and we know, better than anyone that is extortionate. As far as I'm aware, there's no real progress that's been made. At that time, it was that they didn't want to look at that, and they don't want to put the guidelines in around that. But I agree that it does need to happen, in my view. I think one of the things that, one of the arguments that we can back on is generally the professionals that are involved are a part of a professional body. So I have actually previously reported solicitors to the SRA before, so it's unreasonable. So there is that route, and the other route is if you really did push this and they were being completely unreasonable, then the code does make reference to the fact that a landowner should be compensated, but that would be expected to be reasonable. That that's not to say that a professional can come and charge thousands and thousands and thousands. So there is that to fall back on as well. And separately in terms of consideration, so obviously professional fees are treated as compensation, but in terms of consideration and any rental or one-off payments that will be made, the code's quite clear in that respect, and there's a precedent set on a number of cases about how that's to be calculated, and for a code operator it's much, much lower. So,
any other questions? I've got a quick one, actually. So in our case, we've actually got been a predominantly fixed wireless access, and I'm sure there's a few in the same boat here. A lot of our access points are on people's properties, so chimneys, gable ends. Does the code powers give you power against using somebody's house, or is it more just land and sort of street furniture?
So what the code powers do, if you've got code powers, it means you're a statutory undertaker, so you're able to install in highways without Section 50 notices, things like that. But in terms of private property, you would still need to get a way leave. It's just that for obviously the reasons that we've been talking about, you've got greater powers to get that, but you would still need to get, for any private land, you would still need to get permission. You're just much more able to install freely on public land.
Thank you very much. Anything else? No? Okay. We'll move on to the juicy topic of one-touch switching then. So as I say, we've got Gita Sorensen, who's representing Totsco, and also Marcel, who's from the Common Wholesale Platform, who's got this nice piece of middleware to take the pain out of complying. So I think the obvious first question is who's done any kind of preparation at all for this OTS change that's coming up? Not many. Has anyone even read the 80-page working document? Just Bill, Ollie, James. So it's quite a lengthy document that's full of quite interesting detail. But as we've heard from Marcel this morning, I don't think Totsco are in a position to actually make this live yet. So I suppose the first question is, given that they've put a big burden on small operators, why haven't Ofcom given any kind of exemption for those small operators? Why are they going after everyone from the small fry right up to the bigs? Gita.
Thank you. So just to get it clear, I am a director on Totsco. I sit on the board of Totsco. The way Totsco's board is structured is that we have what we call constituencies, and each director is representing a constituency. And I represent the new infrastructure providers constituency, so I represent you. So not that I want to be inundated every day with lots of complaints, but if you have queries and concerns, please do come and speak to me. And somebody is batting for you, believe me. Your situation is known to Totsco, and I spent a lot of time making your situation known to Ofcom as well. And I'm sure there are others doing that as well. But just so, I wanted to start by saying that there there is a voice, and if you want to influence that voice, come and speak to me. If there are particular things you think I should know, then I would like you to come to me so that I can represent you properly at TOTSCO. So going back to Ofcom, so a couple of people have mentioned the general conditions, kind of on and off, and the obligation to provide gaining provider-led switching is in the general conditions, and they apply to every single communications provider, either of network or services. And then on top of that, anybody who provides a broadband or voice service to a residential consumer must comply with the provision of that gaining provider-led service through an industry-agreed process, and that is the one-touch switch. And because the general conditions apply to everybody regardless, it means that it is applicable to absolutely everybody. So the TOTSCO process was designed by industry, but I think it's fair to say that industry means those providers that have resources available to allocate to a working group so that they can, design this. And lots of small providers do not have that kind of resources. So maybe there hasn't been the visibility for small providers in the early stages of what was happening, how it was being designed, how it was going to work. That means perhaps that some things have come to you at a later stage than maybe you had expected. Ofcom's process is that they send out a notification, or first a consultation, then a notification of changes to the general conditions. And it is the obligation of any provider of electronic communication services or networks in the UK to stay up to date with that and to be compliant with it. And it is a very complex document. It's very difficult to understand necessarily what's applicable to you. It depends on what type of provider you are, what kind of network you have, and what kind of services you provide, and what kind of customers you provide those services to. So it's multi-layered, multifaceted in terms of finding your way. So I do appreciate the difficulty in understanding this. But the reality is there is no way out. And the reason there is no way out is that this is a consumer protection remedy that Ofcom has introduced. It's all about protecting consumers' rights and making it easier for consumers to switch between providers. And Ofcom's view, and I have had a number of conversations with them about this, is that this is just a cost of doing business in telecoms. And if the cost of doing business in telecoms increases as they increase the protection layers and whatever else they do for consumer rights, then in their view, so be it. That is it, because they have duties to look after consumers, and it is their view that these are necessary safeguards for customers in order to enable them to switch suppliers. So that's the Ofcom perspective, and I just wanted to get that clear, because it is pretty inflexible. It is what it is, and we at TOTSCO have actually spent a lot of time talking to Ofcom about trying to find solutions to make the one-touch switch process easier to consume for small providers. And as part of the design, there was what was originally known as a small retail portal, as that was part of what TOTSCO was originally kind of commissioned, set up to deliver. But because that wasn't as well formulated at the time that we went out for RFP for the main hub solution, it was decoupled. And then, very fortunately, at the same time, there has been the development in the market that a number of providers, including the coming switching platform, have actually said, we can provide that service. TOTSCO doesn't need to do that. Because TOTSCO really should only do what's necessary, what nobody else can do. If there's a commercial market that can deliver the service, then we shouldn't be getting in there and getting kind of muddled up in that. So what TOTSCO is doing is the kind of the basic hub, and to interface with the basic hub, you need to have an API or work with the API. If you don't have that yourself, there are I believe, several providers that are either able today or plan to be able very soon to provide that intermediary service so that you can upload your customer information to them and they can deliver it. And I know that Marcel was explaining some of that to you earlier today. So it's kind of layered. So what we're trying to make sure is that we get the TOTSCO solution available as soon as we can, that it gets done efficiently and effectively, and that charges for using it are proportionate and doesn't make it impossible for anybody to continue doing business. But we also are now very actively engaging with providers like the CSP to make sure that they know exactly what's necessary to interface with the TOTSCO hub, and to make sure that they understand everything they need to be able to do on behalf of you if you don't yourself want to interface directly with the TOTSCO hub. And that's a really strong focus we have now. We recruited somebody who is actually working specifically on that topic, out liaising with all the small providers and with the intermediaries, trying to make sure that they are as comfortable as they can be. It has to be a big bang. It has to be everybody on day one kind of thing, because there is an existing process that is operated through OpenReach. And as you know, the vast majority of customers in the UK are on operators that are using the OpenReach network. And so what needs to happen is that we need to be able to switch over for all those, the vast majority of customers, when they want to change supplier, they need to be able to switch over kind of seamlessly from the OpenReach system to the TOTSCO system. And that's why we can't have like a gradual kind of onboarding with some providers not quite on yet. And because customers are so keen on the consumer protection side, as we just heard, they are really pushing very, very hard to get as many people on board as possible. And one thing we don't know yet is when we have the solution available and when it's been tested and people have had the opportunity to test that they can work on it, at what point do we cut over? And we think that will be influenced by Ofcom, because we can't check in TOTSCO that 100% of providers are ready and available. That's physically impossible. We don't even know all the providers in the country. Our job is to make it available and to make sure that as many people as possible know it's available. So I know that's quite long, but I just wanted to kind of get a few kind of facts out there and kind of the layered approach. I don't know if that helps.
I think that's good, and certainly improved my understanding listening to Marcel and yourself today. So just to clarify one of the points you made there, so which I think might apply to quite a few of the operators in this room. So if you're not willing or you don't have the resource to implement an API to talk to TOTSCO directly, this is where the common switching platform comes in. And so you would have to upload your customer database in effect, which I assume would be a list of customer identifiers, perhaps how long's left on their contract term, and how much it would cost for them to come out of that contract. And that's where Marcel's business comes in. So maybe you could, I know you detailed on that this morning, Marcel, but is that the short of it really for and your aim towards the smaller operators and the altnets?
Absolutely. The focus is now on the smaller operators because we do believe that the large operators will hook up their systems into the relevant APIs with TOTSCO when it becomes available, and then through our platform to either reach out to the people that are available on our platform, or through TOTSCO to reach out to those that are not available on our platform. Ultimately, reaching out to all the retailers in the UK, which have the obligation. I'm sure at some point in the future there will be a big campaign that says this is now something that is 100% live, and I really hope that by that time, all these smaller retailers, have picked up this, I think, still fantastic opportunity to then say, I can now switch. I've been talking to customer X. I don't know how to, make him move away from their existing provider, but this way, it's gaining lead. It makes it so much easier to to sort of pitch that, to sell that to to those consumer customers, but also to business customers. So in terms of process steps, I kind of set out those process steps this morning. Sign up with us, start talking to us. We have a whole bunch of resource available now that is all really, really focused on this one thing called one-touch switching, in terms of documentation, in terms of how the platform works, in terms of resources to help you fix things. We've always kept cost first and foremost in our mind. The cost of the platform we kept as low as we can be, and the cost of the resource to help out customers to get connected and working properly is kept at a low pitch point as well. And then the other thing is that through collaboration, as I said, we have our monthly stakeholder groups. Through that collaboration, speak to other providers. You may be a provider that is operating in one part of the UK, and you're speaking to another provider who's just done exactly that, done that integration with maybe one of the, one of the systems that they use. Leverage that, learn from each other to get all of these things connected, so that come the day that the real Totsko is switched on, everything you are completely ready for this. That's my message.
Maybe I can pick up from that, the day that the real Totsko switches on, because I think that's a touchy subject in terms of timing. And before you ask the question, I don't know when. Okay, and if I did, I probably couldn't tell you, but I don't. But what's important on that, I think, is the understanding of compliance, because we talked about the general conditions. We talked about the general conditions come into effect on the 3rd of April. So in principle, everybody has to deliver gaining provider-led and one-touch switching on the 3rd of April this year. Now, one thing I can tell you for absolutely certain, the Totsko service will not be available then, because we're just in the process of appointing the vendor for that, and it's going to take a little while. There is if you go to the Totsko website and you register there are regular stakeholder meetings, and on those stakeholder meetings we've shared an outline timetable that says that during the summer there's going to be a testing harness available. At some point between August and October, end-to-end testing will start being made available, and then as soon as possible after that, it will go live. But again, as I said before, we can't say exactly how long that end-to-end testing is going to take. But that's kind of the outline timetable. When it comes to compliance in terms of Ofcom's expectations, I know that Marcel put up earlier, I wasn't here unfortunately, I was on another call, he put up a letter from Ofcom earlier this morning. I think it's the letter that's dated the 6th of February. That letter is kind of imprinted on my brain, frankly, because we spent so much time looking at it. What it does is for the first time, it officially acknowledges that the Totsko solution will not be available on the 3rd of April. It also says very, very explicitly that nobody can be compliant with the OTS obligation in any other way than to use the Totsko solution. So that means you cannot be compliant with the OTS obligation if the Totsko solution is not available. It then goes on to say that Ofcom expects operators to do absolutely everything they can to get ready internally, and that means training your people, getting your processes and systems up and running and ready, so that you are ready to start testing with the Totsko solution or via a third-party provider when that becomes available, and you're ready to go live with it when the Totsko platform is ready to go live. So what this letter says is that if Ofcom finds that you are not doing the latter, i.e. getting ready, getting internally ready, systems, processes, training, and lining up with a third-party provider if that's what you need, then Ofcom might take action. But they're not saying they're going to take action if you're not compliant on the 3rd of April, because actually they're saying you can only be compliant if the TOTSCO solution is available, and that is not going to be available then, and they have acknowledged that. And I just think it's important that if you read very carefully through this letter and take it step by step, that is what it says. I have to say you almost have to be a code breaker to understand that to start with, but that is what it's saying. So I've also had lots of conversations with Ofcom about this. And whilst they will never say that they will not enforce the general conditions, because general conditions are there and we have to comply with them. This is a substantial softening. But one thing they have said to me, and that they're happy for me to repeat, is Ofcom has never taken action against a small provider unless that small provider was engaged in fraud. They will work with people, they'll be understanding, but they do expect you to get on with it and get ready. They do expect that. And whether that's you doing it directly yourself or through third parties, that's up to you. But I think maybe that context and interpretation might help some people maybe feel slightly less worried.
Probably a good time to go for questions if anyone has anything. David?
Sorry, jumped the queue. Thanks for that. Some really good insight. I have two points. One is a question. One is it's kind of a startling observation. One of the comments that came across today is that TOTSCO doesn't know who all of the operators are in the UK. Right. I don't think Ofcom knows who all the operators are in the UK either. That's
a fact.
That's a startling fact. This is a regulated industry where general conditions have to be met. We have to deliver services in a governed manner. We have to make sure that consumers are protected. It seems to me that this is an example of a good wake-up call to Ofcom, or maybe even I might say the Office of the Telecoms Adjudicator, who happens to be here today. Because how can these kind of things be implemented unless Ofcom understands who all the operators are? So that was my... Go on.
So quite a while ago, the UK telecoms regime was changed from a licensing to a general authorization system. And that basically means that you don't have to register with Ofcom, you don't have to get a license, Ofcom doesn't need to know who you are, but there are general conditions, as we've just mentioned a number of times, and it is basically the obligation of anybody who provides a service or a network within the definition in the Act to comply. But there is nothing in there, and it's intentional, it's by design.
But who here, using your paddles, has read the general conditions, who has had reason to look at the general conditions in the last 2 years, please? Put your hand up if you have. Yeah, so we've got 6 or so. And I haven't read the general conditions. I've read some of it. I've read extracts. Likewise, Ofcom's obligations as well. There's some interesting things about enforcement as well, and they have to be proportionate. So we're all regulated to do things in a particular way, and we don't know what the regulations are, and Ofcom doesn't police it in any way, in a meaningful way. So that was one point. The other one is a question really to do with business to business. So today we've been talking about business to consumer. This is now in play. It has to be done. We've got a timeline. I've had several members ask me about, well, does this apply to me because I do business-to-business services? What can you tell us about what's happening about business-to-business?
Okay. As I said before, there are 2 layers of the general conditions. The gaining provider-led obligation is applicable to everybody who provides voice and broadband services to any type of customer. But the OTS part of the general conditions only apply to the provision of those services to residential customers. So there is no prescription of how provision of business or providers to business should deliver the gaining provider-led solution. I don't know whether Ofcom thought that was being helpful. Jack's laughing. The point is that it was not very helpful because it's not likely the industry is going to get together and do two completely different systems and processes. Plus, most providers actually do both. So having two separate systems doesn't really make sense. But the OTA, that was the original kind of engine behind the development of the one-touch switch process specification, and then subsequent to TOTSCO, have been under a lot of pressure from Ofcom to make sure that the solution for residential customers was delivered as soon as possible, which meant that there couldn't be originally a substantial focus on making sure that the systems and processes would work for business providers as well and business switching as well. And that has been to a lot of frustration and worry of a lot of people. Where we are now is that there is and I always forget the name of this group, it is the Gaining Provider-Led Business Steering Group. There you go. There is now this group, and they have gone through in detail the OTS process. They have come to TOTSCO and said, we believe that we can use it as it is. You don't need to make any significant changes to it. We've kind of said, are you quite sure about that? Because we really do need it to work for residential. There's been work with the OTA, and I know that Jack is involved in that, so he might want to say something as well. We are now at the point where the TOTSCO board has made a decision in principle that the OTS system should support business switching as well, and if possible, on the day of launch. So everything is now moving in the right direction, we hope. A lot of hard work has been done by the business provider community to push this along, kind of in the 11th hour. And I think the OTA has been really instrumental in helping that happen. And we think that the solution is now that everybody will use TOTSCO. There needs to be some differences, and Jack will correct me, there are different messages that are required. And there's some other kind of things that are slightly different for the business switching, but the basic engine of the hub and the moving of messages across and how it functions, as I understand it, is the same. Should we hand it over to you? You can give this to Jack, and he knows the details. I don't.
I'm going. I'm on it. Yeah, thank you, Geeta. Yes, the GPLBSG, which is, we've got to change that. It just doesn't work. But yeah, so again, that was a group from industry who recognised that business had been just, I suppose, pushed to one side while OTS for residential was being driven forwards with speed. Looking at the fact that Ofcom were leaning in very heavily to get that done. That group is running. We do welcome, I co-chair it with a colleague from FCS. We have a representation of industry, but not all. The challenge that we've already talked about, who does know all of industry, who knows everybody's there, we don't. We do our best, we try and reach out. That group is running very fast to catch up. In fact, is doing an awful lot of work to catch up. We are still looking at how to partner up potentially with Marcel and others in TOTSCO, who could offer us the support to go forwards of very different needs from business to residential. Residential is in some respects quite simple. It's a broadband service and a voice service, or one of the others, whereas businesses can get very complex quite quickly and have different switching needs, which we talk about a lot. The fact that one of the provisions that Ofcom made very clear on residential switching was no dual billing, which is a common complaint for certain scenarios these days. whereas in the business world, dual billing actually might be a preferred way forward simply to maintain connectivity and certainty of service. So there's some distinct differences. I will reach out, if it's okay, I'm looking at David now, to UKWISPA with contact details for people who want to become involved. As I say, we try and assemble as many people on their distribution lists as we can. It's not everybody. I think my own list is still sort of around the 300, which isn't scratching the surface of the number of retailers I absolutely know are out there. And that's the one thing about the Ofcom general conditions, a subtle shift. Although there were always provisions on retailers, now the whole switching provision sits with the retailer. There's no discharging it through Openreach's processes, or KCOM's were the other mandated network who had to run it. Just on one point, while I've got the mic, try and get it back off me now. A lot of people say, oh yes, Openreach run NOT Plus for anybody who's familiar with it, as do KCOM. There are a whole bunch of wholesalers out there who also do that. So when Geeta talks about Big Bang, it is because so many people have got to, if you like, move away from the old processes they ran as wholesalers, as network providers, onto a new process. Some of the changes are comparatively simple for them to make, others are more interesting as we go forwards, and it is going to be a not small challenge going on. Okay.
Thanks, Jack.
Am I doing questions, Tim? Did he nod?
Just wondering if I don't know which part this is for, but if it's consumer-led one-touch switching, as an example, we've got GigaClear, we're wholesale partners with GigaClear. If a customer, when GigaClear's prices end up at £45 a month, they choose Village Networks at £36 a month, so the consumer's chosen Village Networks at £36. GigaClear then do the hard sell and come in at £17 a month. So is there room in the whole process for that hard sell or that haggle, or has the consumer just chosen to go with Village Networks and off they go? I don't know who.
This might be one for Jack again. I mean, basically, there are safeguards in the process where, for example, the Ofcom has insisted that the customer, because it's all happened so quickly, whereas for example, the Openreach existing process is a 10-day where you have time to think about things. Here, Ofcom has insisted on what they call informed consent. So that means that the losing provider has to send to the customer who wishes to switch information like switching implications, what happens when I switch. But that doesn't involve win-back. So if somebody does do win-back, then it depends where you are during a switching process, whether you can stop it. One of the interesting things is that typically, or in consumer law in the UK, there's like a 14-day kind of right to change your mind if you buy something. And that still exists under the OTS system, but the point is that it may be that your old provider doesn't want you back because you've already been switched. So it does a little bit. It doesn't make it, the switching back and forth is slightly less flexible. I don't know, Jack, do you want to say something more on top of that? Yeah.
Coming. Is that all right?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So that was a good scenario to throw up, by the way, that the customer has, if you like, started the switching process or was considering switching. As Geeta said, the switch implications message, which is part of the OTS process, is meant to just be that. It's quite constrained. It says this is the cost, this is what's going to happen if you leave us, any outstanding charges, any equipment that has to be returned, etc., etc. And the one thing I will correct Geeta on, it's express consent. the customer.
I apologise.
Part of the gaining provider journey is that they have to gain the customer's express consent, which is basically, have you read the switch implications? Do you understand? Have you read our contract? Do you understand the good stuff? I know you all do. So they can, so they go forwards. Like you say, Geeta, there is in theory, the cooling off period or the distance selling regs as it used to be. It's consumer, I can never remember the right term now. It's consumer protection, but it's not the right term. No, okay.
Can't remember.
Yeah, but that's consumer law, and that's above and beyond the regulation. What happens if a customer then thinks, I'd actually have seen a better offer on the website and changed my mind? Of course, they can change their mind. If the switch has not gone through, the provision is in the process for that customer to go to the gaining provider and cancel it, which is the right thing to do. I no longer want that service. I don't want to take up that contract, and they're protected under consumer law and allowed to do that. If the switch is already completed, well, it's done, but they still have that window in which they can say, actually, no, it's not what I wanted. I have the ability to back out of that. I believe there are still some regs around that they might be charged for usage while they were in the contract. It's not like you just go away free. One thing people make a mistake about, they use a phrase rollback, which I personally dislike, which is saying, I'll go back to exactly as I was. No, that's not about it. It's the law is to allow a customer to exit a contract. It doesn't guarantee they can go back to what they had before. But then the customer has to make that choice then. Do they go back to the super special offer of £17 if they missed it, if they didn't open the letter until it was passed? Or do they simply just go to a new provider? There is no obligation on their previous provider to take them back. That's your choice. There might be a very good reason you don't want them back and why they switched. And they can go there. The one thing that OTS tries to offer, and we talked around it, is it can be a lot quicker than the current NOT process, 10 working days, which will, in theory, under OTS, you could switch a lot quicker than that. Next working day is touted, probably less likely because, the practicalities of getting kit out to a customer and whatever processes you might want to put in yourselves as sellers. But, it's Ofcom have said you can't include, I've got to get the language right now, you can't include save activities in the switch implications letter. It doesn't say anything about what you might do outside of that.
There can be no win back, or as it were, as part of the switching implications letter. It can only be you have early termination charges, or if you terminate this service, you also have to terminate that service because they come as a bundle, or that kind of thing.
Yeah. Or the price of your TV service will double or stay the same, whatever it might be. Yep.
Thank you, Joe. There's more questions up here, unfortunately. It was always going to be, wasn't it? Lord Mary Kirk.
Okay, so have we discussed in any of the previous really argumentative conversations we've had on this subject on, say, BT trying to switch somebody from a wireless customer to the BT infrastructure, where physically that can't be done? Is there a provision in all of this for that to be catered for?
Well, yes. I mean, basically, you can only switch to a customer to a network that is served by where the premise is served by that network.
You can, Jack. We've got 2 minutes of this session left.
Really quickly. Yes. Short answer, yes. You can switch between access networks, however, whether they're underground, overhead, or wireless. Yes, that's the whole point of OTS. That will be the whole point of the business switching process as well, is to break down that restriction that currently exists, that you can only switch within the OpenReach footprint or the KCOM footprint. what the first objective we went out with when the whole of industry that were involved in this section was, I must be able to switch between networks. That cannot be left to the customer to place an order with one and then go off and cease their service. They need to make one call, gaming provider led, as the title suggests, and that will switch them between networks, so it will trigger the cease of their old service. But it's done through the hub, through the messaging, through the OTS process.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually quite something really important, as you probably started by saying, is you guys are supposed to be the main beneficiaries of this. Now, you may not think that. You might think it's a pain in the proverbial, but it's meant to make it easier to switch between infrastructures, because there is already a gaming provider-led switching for people who switch on the existing OpenReach infrastructure. This is to try to make it easier for people who are building competing infrastructure, whether it's wireless or fiber or any other technology, for customers to switch onto those networks and between those networks. But I misheard what you said. I thought you said if the BT network couldn't reach where the customer was. I mean, there will be obviously there are provisions that says that you can only switch onto a network that actually serves the premises that the customer's on. Well, that's up to the customer then, isn't it? I mean, if somebody phones up and says that I can sell you 2 meg, and you say, yes, I want to buy that, then that's a customer's choice.
That's what BT said. BT says, we'll give you 70 meg. And then you plug in the ADSL and go, oh, you're only getting 2 meg, and you're in a 2-year contract now, by the way. So, we see this all the time.
Yeah, there's nothing much we can do about that with Totsko. That's a separate issue. That's mis-selling. Yeah, that's really something that you might want to hand over here.
Yeah, there's a code of practice for broadband speeds, so if it sounds like something that would fit into that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they're a signatory, yeah.
Just want to add a point to that when we started crafting our platform, we made sure it is completely product agnostic. So any provider can add any kind of products to the platform, be it wireless, be it fiber, be it satellite, be it bits of string, can be added as a product, and therefore it becomes available for switching from one to another retailer. So.
Well, out of time now, but thank you very much for all the panellists on their input. It's really interesting. I will just mention very quickly, I think maybe the top 3 things that operators can do to be ready to sort of, as a show to Ofcom that you're prepared. I think it's probably well known that to identify the customer, each customer is going to have a UPRN, which for people that aren't aware is basically a sort of 6-digit code that defines a property. So I suspect the messaging will be, this is the UPRN that's been requested as potentially losing or gaining. So if you haven't already got UPRNs assigned to each of your customers, that might be a good first step. Geeta mentioned training. Totsko, it's very easy to register and get an ID. I think it's just an email, and then you fill out a single-page Word document. And I haven't had my reply yet, but I've submitted it. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm prepared. And maybe just wrap up and get together the contract end dates for all the customers, because obviously you're going to want to go back to those API calls and say, no, this customer's in contract. It'd be good to have all your ducks in order from that point of view. But thanks once again to everyone.